Hello, everyone. So happy to be here again in another episode. Welcome to Awaken Woman podcast. And in today's episode, I have the amazing Wendy Maslin, who is a breakup coach. And we will be chatting about the topic that we both have experienced. And so we can actually talk about from our experience, our perception, and how we dealt with this topic, which is trauma bonds. So trauma bond dynamics. Before we kick it off, we actually want to just say a disclaimer to please try to not label your dynamic, your relationship, or your partner as a trauma bond dynamic. Just make sure that you actually understand what that is. And we just want to provide our own experience, our own opinions, and how we think about what we think about trauma bonds. So yeah, please try to not label and just use your own discernment when talking about these topics. Perfect. So
Awesome.
before we kick it off, we want to start with what is trauma bonds, because maybe some of the people who are listening to us might be familiar with this term, and some may not be familiar. So just to have a common understanding, trauma bonds are deep emotional attachments that are developed in a relationship characterized by any sort of abuse. So recurring cyclical patterns of emotional, mental, physical, or sexual abuse, and perpetuated by intermittent reinforcement through periods of high and lows, high love and affection, and followed by distance and abuse. So again, abuse can also be mental and emotional. Sometimes when we're too used to this abuse, we don't recognize that it's actually abuse. We just think that it's a normal pattern in a relationship. That's why sometimes you don't even know that you are in a trauma bond dynamic. So that's why we want to give some light about this topic. What are the characteristics of trauma bonds? Why are they formed? And how we can break this pattern. So yeah, Wendy, tell us what's your view about trauma bonds?
I have, there's so many definitions of trauma bonds, and there's so many different ways of working through them. And I probably describe them in a fairly unique way, but I like to think it's an empowering way because it brings it back to you and kind of gets you out of the victim mode, which I find when trauma bonds are being spoken about, it's often used to describe a narcissistic dynamic. But a lot of the advice out there around narcissistic relationships, a lot of it can be more around just cutting people off and, or just creating really hard boundaries. So I'll explain trauma bonds in my unique way from an emotional healing point of view. So the way that I like to describe trauma bonds is where two people share the same suppressed emotions and the same limiting beliefs, and you're magnetized toward each other. So, everyone has these early childhood or growing up traumas, and not necessarily if you're from a violent family. It's just a part of life. We all have experiences that are uncomfortable that we learn and grow through those. But often when we're younger and we've experienced any type of trauma and we haven't been given the opportunity to finish emotionally processing that event, that emotion gets stuck in our body. And that emotion stuck in the body is also holding in place a limiting belief that was created out of that situation. So the classic one, I'm not good enough, or I'm not lovable. This is what the limiting beliefs held with that trauma sound like. I'm not pretty enough. I'm not attractive enough. That could be an example of a limiting belief with a trauma bond. And that trauma bond, in terms of emotion, that could be holding in shame, could be holding in grief, sadness. So two people share the same. So often people get confused because, this is where mirroring comes in.
Exactly.
Where, and they're like, but I'm not the same as the other person. So if you're hearing this and you're familiar with mirroring, you might be like, but I'm not like the other person at all. They're not, they're not me. I'm nothing like them. And it's important to know that, you might have different behaviors. You might show up in the world differently. You might have completely different personalities. But at the end of the day, you two have the same suppressed emotion and the same limiting beliefs. And the great thing about knowing that is that when you release that suppressed emotion and those limiting beliefs, that's when you're finally able to break out of that trauma bond dynamic. And it gets really exciting. Once we know how to do that, because it's like, oh, I don't need to control the other person, or I don't need to necessarily put in all this super hard work to try and keep boundaries or keep people away from me. I can change my own internal vibration, so I'm not attracting that type of person in future. So that's my definition of trauma bonds.
Love it. Really well defined. I think you covered pretty much what I also thought and experienced myself in trauma bond dynamics. I think a very important point, where maybe giving some light to any women who are listening to us tonight, is just reflect on, if you have a deep desire of changing your partner because it's not giving you what you need, and it's a constant power struggle, where there's these periods of intense love, and then these periods of intense distance and withdraw, and just not being the not being able to live those dynamics is another sign that you might be in a trauma bond dynamic, because they are very, very hard to let go. And what you mentioned is, we are mirroring the same wounds. So our values, personalities, lifestyle can be completely different. But then the wound is exactly the same. And a way to see this is, you said it at the beginning, and I think is a great way to see it, is how can I empower myself by being more aware that I'm in a trauma bond dynamic, and actually work on healing it. So you and I are an example that you can heal it. It of course requires a lot of inner work and personal work, but in terms of why trauma bonds are formed between two people. So as you mentioned, people who experience any sort of abuse or inconsistent dynamics with their caregivers associate love with being inconsistent. So they attract what is familiar to them. Exactly. And that's why we call it a mirroring, right? Because both come from similar upbringings, where they had inconsistent love, emotional abuse, mental abuse, any sort of abuse. In our experience, we talk mainly about mental and emotional. Because the other types of abuse, we suggest that you go to a therapist or a counselor and just seek professional help. But then in terms of these emotional and mental, that can be more subtle and more difficult to actually identify, is we are seeking what is familiar. So both come from similar wounds, because had similar upbringings in terms of those experiences that they lived in and the wounds that were created. So then that's why we come. It's like a magnet, what you said, a magnet, because you are familiar to me, even if it's not healthy, even if you don't give me love on a consistent basis, is what I know love is my definition of love. So that's why it's so important to actually recognize and actually also learn what is not healthy. If we've been doing, if we've been having, behaviors, beliefs, thoughts, emotions that we identify as healthy, but in fact they are not healthy at all, they are just gonna add more pain to ourselves, because we keep repeating the patterns until we see the actual problem, which is us healing that emotional pain that is stored in our body.
Exactly. And I think in terms of mirroring, where I hear people sort of get confused by it, is if, the person they're trauma bonded with, they might have had a really violent upbringing, and the other person might not have. And so they get confused because they're like, surely I don't have, and sometimes people can be in really horrific circumstances. So sometimes people get a little bit scared because they're like, oh, I don't want to work on my trauma bonds because, if I'm a match and I'm looking at my partner who's had all of these horrific experiences, I don't want to dig up my own stuff. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you're the same in that respect. It's more the depth of the emotional wounding. So even though your partner or whoever you're trauma bonded with may have had some really horrific, physically horrific experiences, it just means that you could be matching on an emotional trauma level. So if you have been emotionally abandoned by someone, then it's caused you the same depth of pain and the same suppressed emotion. And I think particularly if you're a sensitive person, you may underestimate how much pain and trauma, just that, emotional abandonment, how much pain that can actually cause, or even just verbal abuse, how much pain that can cause someone who's really sensitive. So yeah, if you're listening to this and you've got a partner that's had really horrific trauma and you're like, oh, if we're a match, I don't want to look at that, then don't panic. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's the exact same. It could just mean that you're a really sensitive soul, and it's going to be really important for you to work through that so you can come back to feeling emotionally safe in the world and safe to connect with others.
And I think another very important point to mention there is that trauma does not necessarily mean a traumatic or intense event. As children, we don't have the emotional tools to process events and situations from a rational point of view, from our rational brain. We tend to internalize everything that is happening to us that is our fault. I'm not lovable, I'm not enough, this is my fault, my parents are fighting, is because of me, my dad or mom are leaving me, I'm not good enough. So then we then develop these mechanisms to then seek that love and be loved, which is performing, people pleasing, changing, fixing. So we take these characters when we are kids, coming from those dynamics from our parents, because that's what we learned, right? That's what we thought. We internalize that pain. We internalize those situations instead of actually processing the pain. We have the emotional tools to process the pain. So then we internalize that pain, creating that trauma, that emotional trauma. And we also develop these mechanisms, which are coming from limiting beliefs, as you mentioned at the start, which is people pleasing and just performing. So then we start just separating ourselves from who we really are. And that's when that disconnection between our authentic self starts, right? Because we think we need to be someone else in order to be loved.
Exactly. Yes. And so many of those that, you hit on it before, it's like we feel like it's all our fault. Like almost every client of mine, we have to work through these deep beliefs, limiting beliefs, that it's all their fault that something went wrong, or it's all their fault that their parent got angry. And it's like, it's that, belief that just carries through our whole life. And you end up in a relationship with, someone who may or may not be blaming you, but you automatically assume that it's all your fault. You take on that burden. So that's just such a huge limiting belief that I feel like everyone needs to work through. It's all my fault, it's all on me, I did it. And it's like, it's just that, when you're a kid, you don't know any better, and you just assume that it's all your fault. Or you could have had someone around you blaming you, when you could have been 5 years old and someone could have growled at you and made you feel responsible.
And the thing is, like, our caregivers also didn't have the emotional tools to regulate themselves. They are also carrying with their own trauma, with their own wounds, with their own limiting beliefs, and it's just a generational trauma, them passing those wounds to us, and us just behaving according to what we've been taught. So that's why it's so important that at some point in our adulthood, we start also questioning all our beliefs. What do we really believe on? What is coming from me and what is coming from society, from our parents, from our teachers, from our grandparents, you know? So it's so important to, that's why I say like personal development and just like really embarking yourself on the inner work is so important, because it's not only about trauma and big events. It's just actually understanding who you are better, looking back to yourself, identify, like finding that identity and who you, like your authentic self and who you are. And it can be tricky, right? Because when we haven't been used to different dynamics or being someone else or different ways of being, we don't know what we don't know. Right?
Yes, exactly. We're doing the best that we can in every moment.
So I always say, like, bringing the subconscious to the conscious will give you the tools to actually change this. So this is the first step. And the you know, the impact is, it can be over time, and as I mentioned, it can be so subtle that you cannot really pinpoint and really say, okay, maybe I am. So I am in a trauma bond dynamic. So I wanted to just mention 7 stages that can, you know, help people to identify. And again, these can vary between dynamics. These are only the stages that I identified in myself and also in some of my clients. So the first stage is love bombing. So, you know, it just starts like this high intense connection, right? Like very quickly, goes through all the stages, meeting them and just starting to be together very fast, making the relationship exclusive very fast, not even having to talk about that conversation. It just implied because you are always, is very intense and happens quite fast.
Excitement, fireworks,
fireworks, the love of my life. You know, we are so compatible. And you barely know the person. You barely know the person, but they're already saying that. So that's a starting point. That
the magnet's activated.
Exactly. The magnet has been activated. So that could be like a way for us to also identify. Then the second one is trust and dependency. So because we develop this love bombing and then we already think that they're our soulmate or the love of your life, whatever you want to call them, we just trust and then build that dependency. It's emotional dependency, and I want to also differentiate that between personal and emotional dependency. What are your thoughts on that one?
I mean, it all goes downhill from that. Well, I shouldn't say downhill, but you know, it all happens from that first, you know, activation of the trauma bonds. Anything that's wounded is then sort of ready to come up. And so often in that second stage that you're talking about, that's when it really gets deeper and deeper, and it's sort of like those patterns start to establish and form, and it's often filling the gap that, you know, you didn't have, that you're wanting that person to fill. I would describe that phase as a bit of a gap filler. It's like, and it probably feels quite harmonious, and you're like, oh, my gap is filled. It's like a kind of a, you know, a nice stage, but it's obviously, you know, can be creating or the establishment of something that, you know, might need to be unraveled later as a part of that trauma bond process.
That's when it gets so hard to leave, when you are already like attached,
entrenched in that dynamic. And you don't notice it because it's, as you said, it feels like love when you're in that. And you're you know, and it feels nice to be entrenched with someone, right? It feels nice to be a part of, you know, be sharing your life in that particular way.
Even if it's unhealthy, that's why it's so hard to leave dynamics, because sometimes people prefer to be in those dynamics. They are familiar. That's what they have. That's what they know their lives.
And their parents might have done it and been happy or seemed happy, and they might have grown up watching that dynamic, and so it might just seem really, really normal for them, and it's not even comprehensible how that could be an unhealthy dynamic. And that's why people eventually hire people like us to unravel it, because it can be really challenging to see if it's just, my parents did this for 50 years. Why can't I do it?
Oh, yeah. 100%. And I think that's something that I also like, talking from my personal experience as well. Like when I started really looking at my own patterns and taking accountability of my dynamics and my relationships, because I always wanted to learn from every relationship I've had. I've always been grateful for what I had, even if at some point the relationship, was not the best, and we had this sort of dynamics. I always wanted to take my accountability. So then it was when I started actually looking at my patterns in the dynamic that I saw with my parents, that I understood better why I thought it was normal. So that's why it's so important. So the third stage is criticism. And this pretty much happens like in combination when you are like, already in that dynamic. It's just all at the same time, just these apps and and love, and then this criticism and just projecting. I'll call it the projection phase. Where we are projecting into each other. And just to give an example to also our listeners, what can be an example of projection? So for example, I will blame my partner, my ex-partner, the one I had mainly this dynamic with, about being very emotionally distant at times and emotionally detached. Right. And then when I started looking at my own patterns, I realized that I was looking for that externally because I was emotionally detached from myself.
Exactly. And that happens all the time. And I think it can be really confronting for people. That's that mirroring. Like, it can be really confronting for people when it's like, all you need to do is just write down a list of all of the things you don't like about that person in your life, and then put I am in front of it. And you'll usually find, and often it can be really suppressed unconscious traits of ourselves that we've completely disowned. And we're like, no, that's not me. I'm not like that. And often, what can happen is if there's a part of us that we're seeing in someone else, it can be that part that maybe we were shamed when we were younger, or in a past relationship, maybe we were shamed for doing a certain thing. And ever since then, we're like, I'm not going to be that person. I'm going to be the best so-and-so. I'm going to be the best, and this happens a lot with communication. It's like maybe someone was shamed for not communicating well. And so they're holding that shame in their body, and all the while learning all these amazing communication techniques. But then, there's still a part of them believes that they aren't a good communicator. And so that's where these mirroring things come in, where it's like, even though, yes, I am a good communicator, deep down, I actually don't believe I am. And I've spent the last, I could have spent the last 20 years trying to be better. And this goes for any trait. So it's like, I'm seeing that in my partner, that the part of me that I've disowned, or the part of me that doesn't believe I'm good enough, doesn't believe I'm this, that, and the other. So that's that was a game changer for me, actually. And very early on, there's a really good book that I read called Debbie Ford. She's actually passed away now, but her book was called Spiritual Divorce. And it has these amazing mirroring techniques in it that do exactly that. The whole book is basically about projections, and it was one of those cornerstone books that really just changed my life, in all areas, not just relationships. But it had all these little exercises that do that, where it's just like, it's ways to bring out the parts of you that you've disowned.
It's amazing. When we can use those opportunities and those situations to actually look at ourselves and take accountability. I remember when I started doing the exercise, I was so impressed by everything. I just thought it was him and not me. And then when afraid of commitment, I was the same. Otherwise, you wouldn't be with someone who is emotionally unavailable. If you are still with someone who is emotionally unavailable to you in a dynamic that is this time of time, if you are emotionally available, you are not gonna go through that. You are gonna stop straight away, right? Because you know that you deserve, you know what you want, you know that you are ready and that you deserve that emotionally available relationship.
And this happens so often where you have, women, like ourselves that have done so much work on ourselves, and then you might get into a relationship with someone that doesn't work on themselves. I hear this all the time, and it's like, but they're not like me, how can I be like them when they don't do any work on themselves? I do all this work. How am I, how can I be so emotionally unavailable? And it's always that deeper level of, there's always a deeper level of us like blocking our hearts. And it's so important to remember, like, it can be confronting, but we always attract our match, our vibrational match. But it's those, when you release the suppressed emotion, this is why it's so important to align our head with our heart. We can do all of the mental working out and we can mentally see the projection, but until we actually release the suppressed emotion that's holding that limiting belief in place, that past trauma, it's going to be really hard to kind of break out of that relationship dynamic.
And something I always mention to my clients in the sessions whenever we are going through all this is that remember that healing happens in the body. So there's this holistic healing approach that we need to remember. It's like body, mind, and spirit. So our mind, which is we learn and we watch, we read, we learn new ways of being, we absorb new information that will give us the tools and the knowledge to change and have new ideas, right? Then it comes the body part where we actually need to embody or heal those repressed emotions and by actually doing the healing work, right? Like being in touch, feeling those emotions in our body. And there's many techniques. Wendy and I also do that in our sessions. There's many techniques on how we get in touch with our emotions, and it's something that we teach to our clients. And then the third part is the body. So embodying that healing that we experience in our body, and also the knowledge and the new information. So it's the integration part. I call it the integration part of the mind, the body, and the spirit. So if you are learning everything and just absorbing all the information, great. But if you are not applying also the body and all the aspects that involve the actual healing, then there's gonna be a connection there.
The heart is in the body, like, and that's where most people get confused, is because they've got this, as I said before, the disconnect between the head and the heart. So you can rationally understand why a breakup happened or a divorce happened, and why that's for the best, and maybe even how that breakup or trauma made you stronger. It could have made you into a really independent woman, could have made you learn a skill that you didn't know before. But on an emotional level, you could actually still feel heartbroken and still be grieving and not actually be able to move on. And so that's why we want to, align the head with the heart so that you can finally move forward. It's not, it won't just be enough just to mentally understand it. That emotional level is so important. It's the heart. It's all about the heart.
It's all about the heart, and also recognizing that not because we went through those dynamics when we were kids is what we deserve. Like, I want you to know, if you're listening to this, that you are deserving of the most amazing and beautiful love. And that starts with being that person for yourself. So give all that love that you are seeking externally to yourself. Become that partner that you want to attract. And that's when your life will change, your life will transform. It's a journey about you becoming the one with yourself, so then you can also be an amazing partner and have an amazing relationship, because at the end it all starts from within. Everything that is happening to us externally is just a projection to our inner world. So start from there. See your dynamics, see your patterns, and see how you can improve and change and transform and heal. So the other part of the stages, because we mentioned a few, so I'm gonna mention them all together. Love bombing, trust and dependency, criticism, manipulation, which is probably also gaslighting and not recognizing when we are hurting the other, not recognizing when we are also have part on the problems and the issues. It can be manipulation with ourselves as well, thinking that is all the other person's fault, where we are manipulating ourselves because we have also some part 50-50, right? Like not some 50-50. Then giving up control, losing yourself, and addiction to the cycle.
Yes.
So, losing yourself is probably the part where is the most the hardest, because once you lose yourself, you abandon yourself, and that creates a lot of resentment within yourself.
Exactly. And so many times you can just be angry at yourself. Like, a lot of people underestimate how much anger and self-blame we hold towards ourselves. A lot of it, you know, we might think that we're angry at that partner or that ex, but yeah, a lot of the time it can just be being angry at yourself for maybe, you know, believing or thinking that you didn't make the right decisions, or that you could have done something better. So yeah, you can get so much relief after you've, you know, just finished releasing that anger that you have towards yourself, all of that self-blame.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, I think we've covered probably the most, like the initial part, where we wanted to explain what were trauma bonds, why they are developed, why we find ourselves in a dynamic that is, you know, wounding, mirroring. So now for the ones who are actually asking, because that's something I asked myself, and I actually tried it, and it's part of the dynamic, which is probably push and pull as well, is maybe you are asking yourself, can trauma bonds become love? And the answer is, if both are not doing the work, it cannot become love. And my perception, my own opinion, is that the person where you were trauma bonded cannot be your soulmate. And this is because once you heal, you will attract, and you will feel attracted to different dynamics. And for both of people to heal themselves and find themselves in that same dynamic, like wanting the same healthy dynamic, it is difficult. If both people get together already working on themselves, again, as I said, with both with wounds, because we all come with wounds, of course, that's not a trauma bond. Trauma bond is when you are unconscious, completely unaware of your wounds, and you're projecting them and blaming your partner. Trauma bond does not mean not having wounds. It's just being unaware and projecting them onto your partner. But if you are working on them and your partner is working on them, of course, there's if you were together already in trauma bonded, there's some hope. So what are your thoughts there, Wendy?
So I mean, this happens all the time with twin flame relationships, where you know, I work a lot with people who are in twin flame relationships. And just a little disclaimer on twin flames, a lot of people come to me because, you know, they've tried a lot of twin flame healing and methods and it hasn't worked, or they've been caught up in the dream that they're going to end up with their twin flame and it hasn't worked. And so I help people clarify that and help them work through that. And so sometimes it can work out and sometimes it doesn't. And as you said, it's really about whether or not that other person grows at the same time. And there could be a delay. Maybe it could take that person, you know, 5 years to maybe catch up, you know, to the same rate as that growth. So sometimes people end up together, but a lot of the times people don't, because the other person doesn't do the work. And so that's the important thing to understand, that, you know, I want people to know, if they're in a twin flame dynamic, you know, we can't control like the other person. And so often what happens is, though, that if we do the deep emotional work, the other people that are around us and connected to us often can't help but grow, because like attracts like, we're all magnetized, right? So if we change our magnet and we're around a certain person, then that upgraded energy can't help but affect them. It's like we're talking about limiting beliefs, and in a couple sense, if one of you has a belief that I'm not good enough, and then you clear that belief and you feel good enough, you're automatically going to uplift your partner, whether you like it or not. And so sometimes your growth will have a positive effect on them, and they might not have a choice but to kind of, it might be triggering for them, might change if they see you all really happy and confident. So sometimes it can really, they can change and grow without even realizing that they're actually upgrading. So sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. But at the end of the day, it's the biggest lesson is letting go of that attachment, because there's going to be deeper levels of those attachment wounds. There's always going to be that anxiety. If it feels like an addiction, then there's a trauma bond there. And so that's one of the good ways to kind of tell is if you're in a good, healthy, happy, place or relationship dynamic, is, do I feel addicted to this person? Like, can I feel comfortable in myself to live without them? There's a distinction there between that addiction and just loving someone and wanting them in your life. Is that it's that attachment, and that there can be deeper layers of that for sure.
And I think another important point is the detachment part. Like, if you are embarking yourself on the healing journey and just starting all the personal development work, detach from having, getting to a final destination, detach from, I'm gonna do this so then my partner will follow, or I'm gonna do this to change the relationship. Is not about that. If you are starting the inner work with that belief, you are starting from the wrong place and with the wrong energy. It needs to be a desire for improving the relationship with yourself, improving your life, having a healthy dynamic with helping managing your emotions, regulating yourself, having healthy coping mechanisms, healthy communication, being more authentic to yourself, having boundaries. Like, there's so many layers to consider. We are only talking about, this small part about trauma bonds, but there are so many layers in the inner work that we need to consider when we are healing. And this is more an encouraging, like, once you start, because people might be, oh, it's too much. Why am I gonna even do the inner work if it's too much? It's actually not at all. It's the opposite. It just starts empowering yourself in a way that you actually get addicted to that kind of work, which is better, because it's something that is improving your life, and day by day you will feel better by every day. So you won't even care about getting to a destination if you know that the next day is gonna be better. And when I say better and that this is an empowering work, I'm not saying that we don't experience lows, that we don't experience sadness. I want you to, everyone to know that sadness, frustration, anger are natural and human emotions. We just need to learn to see them as emotions without attaching any label, without attaching any story about ourselves, and feeling them as with the same love as we feel and embrace the comfortable emotions.
Exactly. And I think that's what happens with a twin flame dynamic, is that you don't actually really get a break from that healing process. So it all happens, it's like a trauma bond on steroids is, describe that twin flame. But the beauty of that, the exciting thing is that, when you shift your trauma bond, the wounding around that on that deep emotional level, the rest of your life changes at the same time. So if you're releasing beliefs that you're not good enough and you're not lovable, then that affects all relationships. That affects your friends, that affects your workplace, your career success, when you finally believe you're good enough. So that's the payoff, is once you start working through it, the rest of your life automatically just blossoms as you align with your true authentic self. It's like, I like to describe it as like if you were a diamond and, you know, you've got all of these trauma bonds, it's like dirt covering the diamond, and we're just chipping away with each trauma bond just to reveal the diamond underneath, which is your authentic self. And life just becomes easier and easier as you work through them.
And you don't want to wait one more day if you know that when you embark on this journey, you're gonna be better. You want to start now.
Exactly.
And if you are listening to us and wondering, please start now. It's just such an empowering and transformational journey that I've done sessions with Wendy actually, and it's just like so amazing to start to get more, you know, deeper within ourselves and understanding ourselves better, and having that compassion, love, and validation that we wish we had when we were kids. Our parents were also best, had jobs, their own lives. So it's giving all that we wish we had to ourselves, and it just like a very empowering position to be. Of course, there's gonna be work when you get in a new relationship. There's only so much healing that we can do on our own. The real also challenge and work also will be in relationship. So, but once you build that you know, solid ground within yourself, and you know your boundaries, you know your values, you know what are the dynamics you don't want to have anymore. So we have to go through what we don't want, and to really know what we want. So that's why we also need to be grateful for those situations. And I always think that every person comes to our life as a teacher to teach us something about ourselves. They were the right person at that time, at that period of time. And another person will come when you are healthier, you know, and you will have a better relationship. So and I think before we close, the thing that I wanted to also say is that the good news is that you can learn to break this cycle. We've broken that cycle with Wendy. So we are an example that, you know, and I know a lot of women as well, other coaches or even clients that have also healed that. So a few also steps, and I will hand over to Wendy to also give the last thoughts about this. So how can you break the pattern? So first, recognize if there's an exists that trauma bond.
So I mean, the easiest thing to do is, as I said before, write a list of all of the things that you don't like in your partner, and put I am in front of them. And then the next stage is, what is that emotion when I say that out loud? You know, whatever that is, that trait that I'm, you know, seeing in my partner, you know, that I don't like, when I say that out loud, you know, I am a liar, I am annoying. It's like, how does it make me feel? So paying attention, when I say that out loud, do I feel shame? Do I feel sadness? Do I feel anger? And when I say it, and when I feel that emotion, where do I feel it in my body? And you might feel like a heaviness in your chest, or you could feel sick in your stomach. And it's starting to pay attention to, like, how do I feel in my body? And if you're feeling triggered when you say that sentence out loud, then that's a trauma bond that's like ready to come up and out. So it's I always say it's exciting. If you're feeling uncomfortable emotion, that's exciting. It means you're ready to move through that next layer.
I say the same to my clients.
It's like, yes, we've hit on
something. Be grateful for the emotion. It's coming out because it's ready. It's ready to be healed.
That's what I would say, is just start to get in tune with your body. Where are you holding that? Is there sadness in your heart? Is there a tightness? You know, you might have a super common when we're not speaking our truth. We might feel like a frog in our throat, or a tightness in our neck or shoulders. And just start to notice that emotion. That's the biggest thing I would say to start paying attention to.
Totally. Then the second step is avoid self-blame. So lots of acceptance, love, and compassion, and that's acceptance, love, and compassion to your experience, to what you went through when you were a kid. Your parents did the best that they could, to your own you know, your own responsibility on the dynamics. Be compassionate, because you also did the best that you could with the level of awareness and knowledge that you had at the time. So there's no point on blaming yourself for doing something that you didn't know back then, but you know now. So now is the empowering yourself. Okay, now I have the information, I can change my future. And how I'm gonna, so is yeah, it's taking accountability, but also with love and compassion about everything that you have experienced. The
Exactly.
third point is go through the dynamics you had with your caregivers when you were a kid, and similar to what you mentioned, write down everything. What was the dynamic they had? What were your emotions? What was your belief about love, about relationships, about conflict, about a partner, about emotions? That's how you're gonna start bringing the subconscious to the conscious level and identify your patterns.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's just journaling, writing it all down. Yeah. And I always say to people as well, it's like don't filter anything.
Yeah.
You know, you want to let that all come up and out, obviously with compassion and self-love, knowing that if there's any really negative thoughts or feelings that are coming out, it's, you know, it's coming from the suppressed emotion and the suppressed trauma. It's not
Yeah.
it's not you.
It's not you.
It's just the
Exactly.
pattern that's ready to come up and be
Yeah.
released. Yeah.
We are loving human beings. We came here with no jealousy, with no judgment, with
Yes.
no criticizing, with no hate,
Yes.
with no trauma, with no emotional
Exactly.
pain. So it's coming back to that being of love and understanding
Yeah.
and
Pure
compassion,
self.
pure self,
Yeah.
pure self,
Yeah.
yeah, which is a
Exactly.
beautiful journey. I know it can be challenging sometimes, but it's all
Yes.
part of the journey. So yeah,
Yeah.
embrace it. Then the fourth step will be, reflect on what healthy dynamics are really are, and what healthy love is. And you can also have a look at the healthy dynamics that you have around you. If you don't have any, you can go to also therapy. You can have
Yeah.
even conversations with people that you might think they have healthy dynamics, and start noticing what are their habits, how do they communicate, how do they manage conflict, how do they regulate their own emotions. And so that an important point here will be also, going to therapy, or working with a coach like you and I. And yeah, we've been there, so we know the steps, we understand the pain points, we understand the challenges.
Exactly. Yeah. And yeah, that's the thing. Like, always choose someone that kind of, you know, embodies what you want to achieve. You know, I always find it fascinating how, you know, often I'll start, you know, with a client, and we won't even realize how similar our journeys are. And it'll be like, oh, I've already healed, you know, almost the exact same limiting beliefs or exact same traumas that they are about to heal. So yeah, always pay attention to, how you feel, you know, when choosing someone. Make sure you choose someone that you resonate with, and there might be reasons why you're choosing them that you don't actually know yet why you've chosen until you get into it. So
Exactly.
make sure you, if you're not vibing with whoever you're seeing, make sure you, just know that there's so many out there. You choose who you vibe with. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. And then the last step will be make personal development a daily practice.
Yes.
And that includes
Yeah.
mindfulness techniques, meditation, journaling, yoga, somatic work, which is getting in touch with your emotions, with your body.
Yes. And the biggest thing I will say, because I get so many people that, you know, are saying, I'm exhausted from working on myself. Like they're like getting, personal development fatigue. And I always say, like, always pay attention to what's shifted and the progress you've made in your life. Because sometimes it can be a bit of a blur when we're moving through so much stuff and we're growing so fast. I mean, I'm a completely different person than I was like 2 years ago.
Oh, even 2 months ago.
Yeah.
I was saying that to a friend the other day. They cannot sometimes tell, because the change happens just in the way we behave, in the way we react, in the way we manage our own emotions, in the way we deal with the lows in life. So sometimes these changes are not noticeable, right? We are the only ones who know how much we've changed. So it's, I always say, I'm not even the same I was 2 months ago.
Exactly. So it's always count the wins, always look at the wins that you're getting. You know, even if there's always that sticky point in that one area of your life, notice all of the other areas that, you know, you're now kicking goals in, because you've just cleared so much limiting beliefs and trauma. Totally.
Yeah, amazing. I think we covered quite a bit. I think, is there anything that you would like to mention just to close before I give the last key message?
Yes, I was just going to say I'm about to launch my new my Freedom Code breakup program next week.
Oh,
So
exciting.
stay tuned if you're wanting to clear some trauma bonds and do some deep emotional work, particularly if you're a really sensitive, empathic type person who takes on other people's emotions. You know, I often attract people that are highly emotional. So if you're like, I'm too emotional,
I'm one of those. I'm highly,
then my program is for you. So yeah, stay tuned.
Exactly.
And yeah, you can head to wendymaslin.com if you're interested. Yeah.
Perfect. I will also put all your details in the podcast in the description. So your social media handles and your website. And before we leave everyone, I just wanted to everyone to know what love is, because we talk about what trauma bond are,
Yes.
what trauma bond dynamics are and how to identify them. But now, if we want to really understand what love is, so like unconditional love is nurturing and uplifting. It motivates you to be a better person. Is safe and mutually engaged. It feels safe. It feels that you are cherished, that you are valued. It's a mutual connectedness and warmth. Actions of attentiveness and care are not just intense feelings of attraction, and a mutual experience that prioritizes feelings of nurturance.
Yes.
So I want you to everyone to live with that message. So we
think that in.
Yes. All right. Thank you so much.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ali. It was such a pleasure. You do such amazing work. And
you too. We are doing the same work. Yeah, it's very it's our passion and what we love, and we just want every single woman to be in the journey with us and just experience the amazing transformation that we've both had.
Yes. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
I will see you all soon. Thank you.